Thank you. This is Dr. Jason W. Morrison, theologist, New South Wales, Australia, and I think we need to try and wrap this audit up. It's gone into the vicinity of something like 38 videos just on one study article of the Watchtower, study article 41 of the Watchtower study edition for October 2019, titled Stay Faithful Through the Great Tribulation. 38 videos I've produced as part of the audit. But we're down to the last two paragraphs now. We'll go to paragraph 18 and we'll read, what has Jehovah guaranteed? How does Revelation 7:9, 13 through 17 fill you with confidence about the future? Well, let's have a look at Revelation 7:9 and read, After this I saw, look, a great crowd. Now, the great crowd, as far as most believers understand, or theologists, or theologians, or scholars, or however you want to put it, ministers, pastors, is the body of Christ, is the church itself. That's who the great crowd is. Now, where's my controller there?
To those groups. So I'm going to do my best to not get too controversial here and too caught up in those details, but I want to kind of share with you my view and how I read this passage, and I'm completely open to being corrected here. So my view in a nutshell is that the 144,000 is talking about what John heard. Okay, the 144,000 is described to John. Notice, John doesn't actually see the 144,000. He is told about the 144,000. Read the account for yourself. Now, what John saw is he saw the four angels standing at the four corners of the earth, holding back the four winds. John is seeing here an earthly vision. Okay, he's seeing these angels on the earth. So you have like an earthly setting already, which is really, really interesting, because he's about to go on to describe, or he's about to be told about the 144,000. I mean, notice that. Look at this. And I heard the number of those who were sealed, 144,000 sealed from every tribe of the sons of Israel. That's clear. John is told about this group. But when you get to verse 9, it says, he looked, and behold, a great multitude which no one could count. So starting in verse 9, John is describing something that he sees. So again, the verses prior to that, he's being told things. So he sees this earthly vision. He is told about a group. He hears about this group. And then he has a vision, and he is seeing a group. So my perspective on this is that the 144,000 is actually the same group that John sees. So you have one group being described in two different ways. The 144,000 is being told to John, and they have these particular characteristics that he's told about, but then he sees a group. So what I want to say here is that there is nothing about this group of 144,000 that can't also be said about this great crowd. There's no unique attributes, I don't think. Now, they're described here as being from the 12 tribes of Israel. That is true. But also, look at verse 9. They're from every nation and all tribes and peoples and tongues. So why wouldn't the great crowd also consist of members from the 12 tribes of Israel if you think that's just literal Jews, okay? So let me give you like an interesting parallel I like to go to. This whole thing about being told something versus what you are actually seeing. And I think there's a really interesting way of viewing this in Revelation chapter 5. If you go to verse 5 in Revelation chapter 5, it says, one of the elders said to me, stop weeping. Behold, the lion that is from the tribe of Judah, the root of David, has overcome so as to open the book and its 7 seals. So John is told something. He's told about a lion. But look at what John sees. And I saw between the throne with the 4 living creatures and the elders a lamb standing as if slain, having 7 horns and 7 eyes, which are the 7 spirits of God sent out into all the earth. So look at this carefully. John is told about a lion, but what he sees is a lamb. So you can maybe call that a contradiction if you want to be hypercritical, but why not try to just reconcile these things and say that what John is described and heard and what he sees are 2 different things, but you can harmonize those 2 things together and say that Jesus is both a lion and he is a lamb. He has both of those characteristics. So why can't you go to Revelation chapter 7 and say that you can have 2 different versions of the same group and harmonize those 2 together? I just don't see any reason why you can't see this group as all of the same thing being described in 2 different ways. And I want to give you another clue. If you go to Revelation chapter 9, you find something really interesting in verse 4. They were told not to hurt the grass of the earth, nor any green thing, nor any tree, but only the men who do not have the seal of God on their foreheads. In other words, if you don't have this seal of God on your forehead, you're in big trouble. Go back to Revelation chapter 7 and look at verse 3. Do not harm the earth or the sea or the trees until we have sealed the bondservants of our God on their foreheads. So according to this, only the 144,000 have this seal of God on your foreheads. But if you go to Revelation 9:4, if you don't have this seal, you're in big trouble. Well, if you go to Revelation 7:9, you don't have anywhere where the great crowd is described as having this seal. Okay, but I don't think you would believe that the great crowd is in big trouble because it looks like they've got a pretty good situation. So this, when you separate these 2 groups like this, like the Jehovah's Witnesses do, I think you run into some big problems. And so I think the most consistent way to harmonize this and put all these pieces together is that to say the 144,000 and the great crowd are basically members of the same group, and that's just the group of true Christians. They all have the seal of God. So I don't see the reason to separate them into two locations. So I know that was a pretty long explanation of all of this, but I wanted to make sure you understood how I view these things, because I don't think we have a very persuasive case made by the Watchtower just yet, and we're only in paragraph 2, so let's see what else they say. Paragraph 3. That vision no doubt strengthened John's faith. How much more should it strengthen our faith since we live in the time of the fulfillment of the vision? We have seen the gathering of millions whose hope is to survive the great tribulation and live forever on earth. In this article, we will learn how Jehovah revealed the identity of that great crowd to his people more than 8 decades ago. Then we will consider 2 features of that crowd, its size and its diversity. These points would strengthen the faith of all who hope to be part of that blessed group. Now, what's really interesting about this is that they're saying that we live in the time of the fulfillment of the vision. Really? Because in this vision, this is talking about those who come out of the Great Tribulation. Well, as far as I know from Watchtower theology, the Great Tribulation hasn't even started yet. So how can you say that this vision is being fulfilled? How else can you read this? They come out of the Great Tribulation, then they're described as a great crowd. How is that being fulfilled today, even within Jehovah's Witness theology? That's got to be just a completely false statement. You're not living in the time of the fulfillment of that vision. Now, you can say that you have members of the great crowd living right now, but how does that even make sense? They're not described as a great crowd until after the Great Tribulation. Paragraph 4. Christendom generally does not teach the scriptural truth that one day obedient humans will live forever on earth. Now, I think that might be true, that if you just went and interviewed a number of Christians and you asked them, where do you think you're going to spend eternity? They're probably going to say, well, I'm going to go to heaven. That's what I would say most Christians do believe. But I would say Christians that are very informed on this, that really know their theology, they've really thought their theology through, I think you'll find a lot of those Christians would describe that, we're going to have a new earth, a new heavens and a new earth. And we're going to live forever on a restored earth. And they would even say something like heaven and earth are going to be kind of combined. And so you're going to have a heaven on earth sort of thing, where Christ and Jehovah are going to be on earth. We're going to dwell with God. I think that's what a lot of more informed Christians are going to say. And if you think I'm off on that, if you think that's more of a fringe group, you can find plenty of very prominent scholars who hold that view, that Christians are going to live forever on a new earth. I mean, just to give you one name, no little name, N.T. Wright. You may have heard of him. N.T. Wright is one of the most prominent theologians alive today, extremely prominent. And you can read his books where he goes into great detail in describing that the locational hope for Christians is on a restored earth. So the Watchtower is somewhat right here, that generally Christendom doesn't hold to this. But then they say today most religions in Christendom teach that all good people go to heaven when they die. Now, I don't think that's true. I think most Christians would say that that you have to have Jesus Christ, and that it's not your good works or your goodness that would send you to heaven. It's the righteousness of Christ and believing in Him that allows you to go to heaven. It's really the more liberal groups that teach that just good people go to heaven when they die. But I don't think that still encompasses the majority of Christendom. If the Watchtower is right on that, show me the numbers. Is there a poll that teaches that, or are they just saying this? It was different, however, when the small group of Bible students were publishing the Watchtower in the late 1800s. They understood God would restore paradise on earth, and that millions of obedient humans would live here on earth, not in heaven. However, it took time for them to discern clearly who these obedient humans would be. Now, this is a really interesting admission, because I've heard more of the Jehovah's Witness apologists, the ones who like to go on the internet and defend their beliefs. Those apologists would say that there are certain things that you don't necessarily need the Watchtower to teach you. They're so clear from reading the Scripture. For example, Jehovah's name, or that the Trinity is false. Things like that. Another thing is the new earth or paradise earth. That's just one of the core doctrines that you can just read the Bible without the Watchtower and say, you don't need the Watchtower to find this in the Bible. This is just so strikingly clear. So why couldn't it be, if that was so clear, just as clear as their view on annihilationism, for example? If that's so clear, why couldn't the early Jehovah's Witnesses hold to that, right? If that's so clear. Paragraph 5, of course, the Bible students also discern from the Scriptures that some would be bought from the earth to rule with Jesus in heaven. So here's another place where they think this is teaching that the 144,000 is in a locationally different place from the great crowd. Well, if you go to Revelation chapter 5, verse 9, it says, "And they sang a new song, saying, Worthy are you to take the book and break its seals. For you were slain, and you purchased for God with your blood men from every tribe and tongue and people and nation. And you have made them to be a kingdom and priests to our God, and they will reign upon the earth. So how do you harmonize these two things? Well, it sounds like here, if you have the 144,000 being described, they're reigning upon the earth. Well, if you go to Revelation chapter 14, verse 3, it says they were purchased from the earth. And I think the Watchtower is reading too much into this verse about being purchased from the earth. Now, let me give you like a parallel just in language. Last weekend, I purchased Chick-fil-A. Like, I got fries and I got some grilled nuggets. I purchased those from Chick-fil-A. But I never left Chick-fil-A when I had my meal. So you can purchase something from a location, but those things don't necessarily have to leave that location. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. I think this purchased from the earth is just describing the location from which they were purchased from. I mean, where else would they be besides the earth, right? It wouldn't make sense to say they were purchased from heaven. They were purchased from the earth because that's just where these people were that got purchased. But is Revelation 14, there are other places where it describes them as being in heaven. Well, look at this. I think this is not describing a group that's in heaven. 14:1, Then I looked, and behold, the Lamb was standing on Mount Zion, and with him 144,000, having his name and the name of his Father written on their foreheads. Sounds to me like you've got an earthly setting here. You have Mount Zion, and so I don't see anything here talking about heaven yet. But look at verse 2. And I heard a voice from heaven, like the sound of many waters and like the sound of thunder, and a voice which I heard was like the sound of harpists playing on their harps. And they sang a new song before the throne and before the four living creatures and the elders, and no one could learn the song except 144,000 who had been purchased from the earth. So what's interesting here is that John sees something, but then he hears something from heaven, implying that the vision is on earth, because he's hearing something from another place. And so I think there's some clues here which make this look like this is an earthly scene, not a heavenly scene. He's seeing something on earth, he's hearing something on heaven. So I still don't see anything explicitly describing this group of 144,000 as having an eternally separate locational hope from the rest of Christians. There's nothing yet. Let's continue on. We're never going to get through. This is in paragraph 5. We've got a long ways to go. That group would be made up of 144,000 zealous and dedicated Christians who had served God faithfully while on earth. What about the great crowd? In his vision, John saw that group standing before the throne and before the Lamb. Those words led the Bible students to conclude, like the 144,000, the great crowd would reside in heaven. Now, why come to that conclusion? We've not seen anything yet that would just explicitly state that this group is a separate group. If both the 144,000 and the great crowd were to live in heaven, how would one group differ from the other? Well, that's a great question. The Bible students thought that the great crowd must be made up of Christians who had not been fully obedient to God while here on earth. Why would you conclude that? Although leading reasonably clean lives, some of them may have remained in Christendom's churches. The Bible students concluded that such ones demonstrated a measure of zeal, but not enough to rule with Jesus. Because of their love for God had not been sufficiently fervent, the great crowd would qualify to be in heaven before the throne, but not to sit on thrones. Wow, you've got some really, really poor reasoning by the early Bible students. Paragraph 7. Who then would live on earth? The Bible students believe that after the 144,000 and the great crowd were gathered to heaven, millions of others would be granted life on earth to experience the blessings of Christ's millennial reign. The Bible students did not expect those millions to serve Jehovah before the start of Christ's reign. Rather, it was thought that this group would be educated in Jehovah's ways during the millennium. Thereafter, those who conform to Jehovah's standards would be blessed with everlasting life on earth, whereas those who rebelled would be destroyed. The Bible students also thought that perhaps some who would serve as earthly princes during that time, including the resurrected ancient worthies, faithful men who died before Christ, would somehow be rewarded with heavenly life at the end of the millennium. Thus, the Bible students felt that there were three groups: the 144,000 who would rule with Jesus in heaven, and two, the great crowd of less zealous Christians who would stand before the throne of Jesus in heaven, and three, millions of people who would be educated in Jehovah's ways on earth during the 1,000-year reign. In Jehovah's due time, however, the light of the truth began to shine ever brighter on this topic. So in other words, you can give them a free pass. It's okay that these early Bible students were wrong and misinformed. They were just trying to figure things out. Give them a break, give them a free pass. It's okay. The light would get brighter and brighter and brighter. Well, why can't the rest of us get a free pass? Why is it just them? Because the rest of us are going to get destroyed at Armageddon. Why don't we get a free pass? Why is it okay for them to get a free pass? That's one thing. The second thing is that this isn't actually that drastically different from what Jehovah's Witnesses believe today. Kind of in conclusion, when you go to paragraph 8, they talk about three groups. Okay, so I'm not saying there aren't differences. Indeed, there are differences, but let's kind of look at the big picture here. Because within Jehovah's Witnesses theology, there really are three groups. Okay, when you think about what's going to happen in the end, there are three groups. You have faithful Jehovah's Witnesses who are part of the great crowd. They're going to be resurrected to live on earth during the millennium. That's one group. The second group is that you have the resurrection of the unrighteous. They're also going to live on the earth, and they're going to have the opportunity to learn about Jehovah. I guess they're going to be taught by Jehovah's Witnesses, and they're going to have the opportunity to learn about Jehovah and repent and be a follower of Jehovah. That's the second group. The third group, of course, is going to be the 144,000 who will be resurrected and live in heaven with Christ, during that 1,000 years, and they will continue to be with Christ. And so there you have three hopes, three different groups. Okay. Three resurrections, in other words. So not a whole...
Yeah, Dr. Jason Morrison, theologist again. I just want to say thank you for watching the videos, and I hope you got plenty of self-rediscovery and freedom out of it. If you watched it on YouTube, please share or like, maybe even comment. If you watched it on Facebook, like, comment, share. But most of all, get out and live. This isn't a rehearsal. You've got a one-off life. Don't let your loyalty and your faithfulness blind you to the life that you should be experiencing. Till the next video, thank you for watching, and bye for now.